If you've watched my channel before, you know I work out of one bay of an old carriage house. Around the middle of the summer, I took down this wall that I had built out when I first started working over here and opened it up, and am now utilizing both sides of the garage as a workspace. I had a ton of material in here left over from jobs over the years, stuff I had accumulated, and in order to turn this into a workable two-sided space, I decided to make this bear out of the old scrap. This bear is about 75% done. I'm going to start doing the detail work on it probably later this week. And that's what I've been up to. The videos I've been posting recently are mostly of the bear. I've made furniture for this particular customer before, and they are fans of kind of mid-century modern, very sleek lines, not a lot of detail work on furniture, and that's what this bed is going to be. It's kind of a mixture of these two photos, more of like a very basic platform style bed and a little more of a detailed bed. It's going to be, I mixed the two designs together. I'm a terrible drawer, but this is kind of what I came up with. And we decided on keeping the tapered legs on the bottom because that kind of harkens to that mid-century modern style, but the tops are not going to be tapered like in this photo. They're going to be left square. This molding is removed and it's going to be plain like this, but this piece will have an added footboard. It won't go as high up as this one. They want it about halfway up the mattress, and to match a piece of furniture in the existing room, I'm just going to curve the bottom of it like this. So the 4 posts, the 2 side rails, and a hidden back rail to kind of shore up this headboard are all going to be made out of solid cherry. I have 3 pieces of 6/4 cherry I got at the lumber yard yesterday, and a piece of 8/4 cherry for all the legs. Now, to save money, and because you won't be able to tell the difference, the panel and the back, especially since most of the time they're covered with pillows, and the footboard are going to be made out of cherry veneer plywood. It's a little harder to find where I live. It's much easier to find birch or maple veneer plywood, but if I can't find it, I'm just going to make my own veneer ply, and it will still be cheaper than as if I was to make this out of solid lumber, and I won't have to worry as much about wood movement with something like veneered ply versus this huge sheet of solid lumber. Solid lumbers I get is from a place about a half an hour from my shop. If any of you read Fine Woodworking, you'll have noticed they advertise in there hardwoods, and the quality of lumber is really great. You can get, if you are someone who wants to make something and you don't want to make it out of construction grade lumber or cheaper lumbers, you want to make it out of hardwoods and you don't have a lot of tools, a lot of these bigger lumber yards like Harn, when you're there, if you ask them to mill up the lumber for you, they will. Of course, it's going to be an additional fee, but it's a nice option for people that don't have a ton of tools. And I've milled up all of my lumber. The only thing I haven't done is cut it down to size, so one edge on all of these is still rough. This piece for the legs is ready to be sliced into the legs, and for the beginning of this video, I show people how to use a table saw and a planer to mill lumber for those of us that don't have a jointer. Shop space reasons, monetary reasons, I don't have one. So the first part of this series is going to be showing you how to make the 2 jigs. The planer one's super simple. It's basically a flat board that you shim your piece flat and then send it to the planer. The jointer one is also very simple, and it just kind of recreates that outfeed infeed table that you see on the jointer to knock down high spots on your lumber to make that one surface flat. So I'm gonna have a separate video showing how I made those, but from now on in my videos, if I'm gonna be using hardwoods and I'm milling it myself, I'll just refer back to this video instead of showing people repeatedly over and over again how I get my lumber flat. So to make my legs, I'm using a chunk of 8/4 cherry, which means it's 2 inches thick. I'm going to be ripping it down on my table saw another 2 inches, so that it will be 2 inches square. 2 of my legs are 60 inches, 2 of my legs are 21 inches. So this is just about 60 inches, so I'm going to rip 2 sections, and then I'll rip a third section trying to avoid this knot, and that could be cut into 2 pieces for the 21 inches. The frame of this bed is going to be made in 4 basic parts. The footboard is going to be one part with the 2 legs, and the panels will be mortised into the legs. The headboard will be made the exact same way as one piece, and then there'll be 2 side rails. Obviously, I'm going to add in all the bracing and everything in the middle, but there's going to be 4 main parts. So I'm going to start making the footboard and the headboard. Once those are done, attaching the side panels is pretty easy. So what I did was I took that photo I had and just kind of drew in pencil the modifications that we worked to make on this to make it more suited to the customer. So you could see that there's going to be a footboard instead of just a plain platform. Everything will be squared off, but there will also be this curve added on the bottom. Now the one stipulation for this bed was she wanted 8 inches from the floor to the underside of this panel in order to fit stuff underneath the bed. That's probably, if you are making something like this for a customer, I made sure to ask her what she wanted to put under the bed, because these platform style beds are usually lower to the ground than other styles. And in fact, we ended up raising the whole height of the bed up a little bit to accommodate that 8 inches. So if you are making something like this for someone else, or even yourself, that is a measurement that you might not think to put in there before you start. But make sure that your clearances are right for stuff that is going to go underneath the bed, because I don't know anyone who doesn't store stuff underneath their bed. So since all this has to match, I had to locate cherry plywood. And originally I was having a hard time finding the cherry plywood, which is going to be these 2 panels here. So I was kind of toying around with the idea of actually veneering my own plywood, but these panels are quite large and I don't have a vacuum press. And while it is something you can do, it just would have been a lot more work. So I ended up contacting one of my contractor friends in town, and he told me about a place, it's a good half an hour away, but a place that sells hardwood veneered panels. Around here at the box stores and other stores, you could pretty much get red oak, maple, and birch, and that's about it. So they had this cherry. It's not cheap, but it's much easier and more efficient than doing it myself. So I picked up 2 sheets this morning. I should have a little bit left over since the footboard's so small, but it was one of those nice circumstances where contractors are great people to know, because they usually do such a multitude of jobs. They do know where to get the best supplies and who carries what, because this company, I did extensive searches for cherry plywood online, and this company was not popping up on the internet. These are the 2 legs for the footboard, and I cut them oversized at 24 inches, even though I only need about 21 inches, so that is my first mark. My second mark is going to be 6 inches from the bottom, and that's basically where I plan on putting the taper for the foot once this is all done. The third mark is 8 inches up from the bottom, so that shows me that that's how high the footboard has to be. And then I marked a 1/2 inch down from the top, since this is going to be one long tenon, one long mortise. you don't want to see that joint at the top. So I just marked a 1/2 inch down, so there will be a little topper at the top of these, and then I roughly marked where I want that mortise to go, and that plywood's going to slide right in here. So what I'm going to do now is, this I measured is 12.5 inches, so I'm just going to rip down a piece off of one of these sheets of plywood, 12.5 inches, and then roughly cut a piece off of it, because I think I could use my dado jig to make these mortises, but I need a piece, and then I'll be able to test fit what I have in there. And the nice thing about my new shop is I can now pretty much cut down sheets of plywood in here. I don't have to do it outside. It saves so much time. So I was hoping my dado jig I made would work with this, but the stock is just too thin to be able to get that jig on there. So what I did was I put a 3/4 inch straight cut bit in my router table. I set everything up so that it will cut through this mark. So this is all set up. I put a feather board on there just to keep everything in place. You can see I have 2 little pieces of tape, and those are going to indicate with the line in the front to drop it and when to lift it in the back. And I always cut these a little shy of the edges because I'd rather have to chisel some material out than it go past where I want it to be. So the bit in there, like I said, is a straight cut bit. It looks similar to this when it's not in my router table. With a bit like this and a hardwood, I'm going to be taking off, sending this through in multiple passes, probably only taking off like 1/8 of an inch or so at a time, and just sending this through, and I'll do them both at the same time. The one nice thing about setting up the router table is then when it comes time to do the long ones, I could keep this all in place and do the long ones the same way. I honestly sometimes forget to use my router table because it was kind of hidden away for all those years. It wasn't out and easily accessible, but this is probably a better way to do it than the dado jig. So I usually like to test stuff like this on a practice piece before I start, but I really didn't have anything, so I just did a very light pass. This is probably like a 30/2 of an inch. You could see how that indents perfectly in between my lines, and it doesn't go past my marks. So now I could just keep passing these through, raising them a little bit. I definitely want this to be at least 3/4 of an inch. I might actually go to 1 inch deep, and I'll cut these on my 2 pieces. About 1/4 of the way through cutting these mortises, I ended up moving that feather board because the piece was getting stuck on it and I couldn't see my tape marks. So I removed that and kept cutting, and now these are both at about 3/4 of an inch. And my experience with these sorts of bits, doing this way, is slow and steady wins the race. I probably made about 10 passes. If you try and cut off too much at once with this, it really tries to pull and drag the piece out of your hands. But little increments go through really nicely. So I have this scrap piece. You can see how nicely and snugly it fits in that groove. So now, in order to get my correct distance, I'm just going to square off these corners, and I should be able to start dry fitting that footboard panel in there. So I dry fitted that footboard together, and then I popped the legs back off, and before I popped the legs back off, I marked on here how far they came in on that plywood. I popped them back off and measured, and they are both at exactly 3/4 of an inch. On both sides they sink in 3/4 of an inch, which you'll have to know that measurement in order to cut this plywood slab. So on each side I also marked where my side rails are going, since they're going to be 6 inches high and 1 3/8 deep. They're going to line up with the bottom of this. I marked where those are going to go also on both sides, just for reference, because these are most likely going to be tenoed in place as well, so I'll have to put a little tenon there. Then, since this is a king-size bed, it's 76 by 80 inches. So the footboard needs to be at least 76 inches, and since my side rails are going to be coming flush with the edge of these posts, that means I have to measure from the inside edge in order to get that 76. There's probably going to be the mattress will sit in a little indent on the bottom of these foot rails, but in general this is what we're looking at. So for my inside edge over there, I measured 77 3/4. That 3/4 is going to account for the 3/4 that gets sunk into this one side, and the 77 is going to account for the fact that even though the mattress is 76, you always want a little bit of leeway on either sides of your mattress. This is going to be about 1/2 inch on either side, just for bedding, for unstandard sizes. In general, with even installing, when I do cabinets and everything, you always want to give yourself a little bit of play for that. So I'm going to cut this at 77 3/4. I'm going to cut it just to my radial arm saw, because that doesn't leave a super nice clean edge, but the edges of these are going to be buried into the legs and you'll never see them, and it's much easier to do it on there than to try and set up something to cut that span on my table saw. So with the basic structure for the footboard done, I softly cut these to height, taper the legs, put the curve on the bottom, but the basic structure is done. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the headboard. Now the headboard is going to go together a little bit differently, because down at the bottom here, I already marked it, this slab of cherry, I'm going to put tenons on either end and mortises here and connect that through there, just to make this back a little bit more sturdy instead of relying on just the plywood, in which case the top of this will have a dado going across the whole thing, so that plywood will sit in the bottom of that as long as the edges of the post here. So I marked center on here, I did the same thing, 1/2 inch down. I measured up from the bottom, this is to 60 where I want it, so these will get trimmed, 8 inches for the underneath. The board I'm putting here is 5 inches, so 5 inches for that, and then starting there I can make my mortise into here. And since my router table is still set up, I could just do these the exact same way I did the other ones. If you don't have a router table, there's a couple different ways to make mortises for something like this. One way to do it is with a drill press. I've done that in my other videos. I chose not to do it on this one just because the bit, I'm sure there's a technical term for this, but the bit has a tendency to dance around and you don't always get a perfectly flush mortise. That is a nice option if you're also putting a tenon piece in there with a shoulder on each edge, because if the edges of your mortise aren't perfect, that shoulder will hide it. With mine, there is no shoulder, it's just a panel, so if this line wasn't perfect, it would show up really easily on your finished piece. Now on the bottom here, where I'm going to be putting the tenons on that board, I'll probably use the drill press, so you'll be able to see that method later in this video. Now another option if you don't have a router table is you can make a template. And this is a template I have from when I did a sleigh bed a couple years ago, and I made this template out of, I believe this is 3/8 inch plywood, and I just had a router bit follow it so I could get perfect cutouts of the sleighs. But then once I was done, I put these grooves in the middle, and then I just had a router bit. I had a router bit similar to this one where the follower bearings mounted on top of the bit instead of the bottom, and then as long as that bearing followed the inside edge of my template, I could cut those grooves and it wouldn't wander because that bearing will follow whatever pattern you have for it. So that takes a little bit longer to make a pattern for cutting mortises, and that's why I use my router table. But if you don't have a router table, there are always options. So then I prop these on top of the legs so everything is lined up. So these are flush. And flushed on the other side as well. Then I ripped this one piece down to 5 inches, and then I place it on top of where it's going to go on these legs. So there's an inch on either side, which means I'm going to be making an inch tenon as well as an inch mortise. It's like that on both sides. So then once I had that propped, I could go through with my square, line it up, and draw a mark on either side. Now I'm going to cut these tenons on my radial arm saw. I have a tenon jig that slides on my fence that works really well, but my ceiling's not high enough in order to put this piece vertical and cut those tenons, so a second best choice is to cut them on my radial arm saw. So I wrapped my marks around all of my sides, and then I marked with my plywood the part that needs to come off the top and the bottom, which will leave me a 3/4 inch tenon. So I raised the blade on my radial arm saw to adjust for that new height, and I could just line it up with my end line and keep trimming off this top. After cutting those tenons, you could see how I realigned everything back up, and the width is still perfect. Those tenons are about an inch. So I went around and I marked the outer edge of this whole thing so that I'll have a guide for the depth when I go to drill these. And you can see by the way this is set up, once this is done, this will have a dado across the entire top to receive that piece of plywood. But also, if you wanted to save yourself some time and you had a router table, you just could have extended this 3/4 inch mortise all the way down to the bottom of here, one continuous mortise, and you'd be done. But I wanted to show you a couple different ways to cut these. So on these ones up here, I'm going to use my drill press to make those mortises. And like I said, since you have these shoulders on either side, if your grooves aren't as nice as you get on a router table, these will hide a little bit of imperfection. So I'm going to set up a quick little table. So I'm going to set up a quick little cradle on my drill press and get out my 3/4 inch bit and drill these mortises. So this jig is super easy to make. I started by putting a 3/4 inch spade bit in my drill press. Then I had a 1/2 inch piece of ply scrap and these 2 pieces of wooded scrap. You could really use anything you have, and I sandwiched my piece in between those 2 pieces and then screwed each of these pieces into the plywood. That's so that this could slide in this kind of cradle. Then I lowered the table and I put a clamp on one of these, and I just twisted this back and forth until when you push, so when you have that one side clamped down, then you could push this whole mechanism forward or back until the point of your blade runs along your center mark for that mortise. So once I have that point running down my center the whole way, I'll put another clamp on the other side. Once that cradle was in place, I slid this off and marked an inch, and then set my depth so it will cut consistently that whole piece. I can slide this back into my cradle. Definitely not a bad mortise. The only thing about this one now is you have to go through and clean up all these triangles. If you can get away with a smaller tenon and you could use a smaller bit that's a spiral bit, you can usually, once you've gotten this far, take the piece and drag it slowly back and forth, and that drill bit will kind of cut down some of these high spots. You can't really do that with a spade bit. So I cleaned up the edges of both of these mortises. I think my camera cut out at some point when I was cleaning these up, but I just used a chisel to clean them up, square off the corners. You can see how this mortise is, since it's an inch, it's a little deeper than the one I have here. And like I said, they're not terrible joints, but you can tell that there's a little bit of undulation on the edge. Whereas the ones that are machined on the router are just super clean. Then I went over to my tenons and I used a rasp and I just rounded over all my corners and my edges, and now I'm going to try and dry fit this whole thing together. So those tenons fit in there perfectly. You could see them nestled in from there. And probably just as important is the fact that these are still the same width, which is important because when you go to put your side stretchers on, if this is wider than this one, your edges won't line up properly and your bed frame won't be perfectly square. So now that I have these nestled in there, I'm going to go through and rip a dado down this whole top piece that's going to be on this, that's going to correspond to my opening here, and that way when I put my plywood in, it will fit in like a C.